Let me show you something. In a little fire station in California, there's an ordinary light bulb that has been burning almost without stopping since 1901. Over 120 years of light from a bulb hand-blown before most homes even had electricity. So ask yourself one simple question. If they could build a bulb to last that long, why does the one in your kitchen keep dying every single year? That old bulb is dim and not very efficient, but it proves a point that should make all of us angry. Long life was never impossible. We simply stopped being sold it. Because in 1924, the largest light bulb makers in the world held a secret meeting in Geneva. They formed a cartel, and they agreed on something extraordinary. From now on, they would make their bulbs worse. Bulbs that had reliably burned for 2,500 hours would now be engineered to die at 1,000. Not by accident, by agreement. And any factory whose bulbs lasted too long was fined and forced to pay. They had a polite name for this: planned obsolescence. Building something to fail on schedule so that you are forced to buy it all over again. That meeting was almost 100 years ago, but the idea behind it never left. Today it is built into almost everything you own. We are surrounded by more things than any people in history, and almost none of them are built to be with us in 20 years. My name is Ray, and this is my workbench. I spent most of my life right here, repairing the things other people threw away. Clocks, sewing machines, tools, the appliances families kept for 40 years. And opening up thousands of them taught me one hard truth. Most of what we buy today is built to fail, but the things our grandparents owned were built to last a lifetime, and then handed down from one pair of hands to the next. So pull up a stool. Today I'll show you 10 of them. Number 1. The cast iron skillet. Just look at it. A single solid piece of black iron. Walk into almost any old American kitchen and you'll find one. Heavy, black, and very often older than the person cooking with it. It sits on the stove like it owns the place, because in a way it does. Back then they were poured in great American foundries, where the iron was tapped white hot and ladled by hand into sand molds. It was hard, hot, honest work, and it showed in every finished pan. A good cast iron pan simply does not wear out. It's a single slab of iron. There's nothing to break, nothing to peel, and nothing to replace. And the more you cook on it, the better it gets, as the oil bakes into the metal and builds a natural non-stick surface no factory could ever bottle. 100 years ago, makers like Griswold and Wagner poured skillets so fine and machined them so smooth that cooks still hunt for them at estate sales today. These weren't cheap pans. They were precision tools, balanced in the hand. People genuinely wrote them into their wills. Now the modern non-stick pan is the opposite. A thin shell of stamped aluminum, sprayed with a chemical coating that begins flaking into your food within a couple of years. You cannot repair it. You cannot reseason it. When the coating fails, the whole pan is garbage. Lay the two side by side on the bench and the story tells itself. One was built by people who wanted you to keep it. The other by people who need you to come back. One is a tool you pass down. The other is trash with a warranty. If you take only one thing from this whole list, take this. A good skillet costs the price of a lunch, and it will outlast you. Number 2. The sewing machine. This is one of the most beautiful machines ever built for a home. Open a closet in an old house and find a heavy black machine covered in gold scrollwork, and you've met one of the great survivors. For decades it was the beating heart of the household. Mending, patching, taking in and letting out. They built these out of cast iron and solid steel. No plastic, no circuit board, just hardened metal meshing with hardened metal. They built them to be the heart of a working home for a lifetime, not for a season. No software to update, nothing to corrupt. A machine built in 1920, oiled now and then, will still sew a perfectly straight seam this very afternoon, more than 100 years on. Families made every stitch of clothing on them. The company was so sure of them they sold them on installments, a few dollars a month. They knew the machine would easily outlast the debt. A modern budget machine, by contrast, is a plastic shell, plastic gears, and a tiny motor. When one small gear strips, and it will, the repair costs more than the machine did in the first place. So you don't repair it, you throw it away. For them, that's not a flaw, that's the design. I have customers who bring me a machine their grandmother used during the Depression. It still runs smoother than the one they bought last year. It was never about technology, only whether the company wanted it to last. Number 3, the mechanical watch. Hold one of these up to your ear, and you can hear it breathing. A true mechanical watch has no battery at all. It runs on a tightly coiled spring and a few dozen tiny parts, wound by nothing more than the motion of your wrist. It is a tiny machine, and like any machine, it can be opened and understood. Lay all of its parts out on a cloth, dozens of them, and there is not a single mystery in the pile. Every spring and gear has a job, and a person can learn each one, and every single piece of it can be cleaned, adjusted, or replaced. A good watchmaker can take a watch that hasn't run in 50 years and coax it back to keeping perfect time. They were designed from the very start to be cleaned, oiled, and serviced forever, not thrown away. That's why a mechanical watch becomes a true heirloom. It moves from a grandfather to a father to a son, and it keeps ticking faithfully through all three of them. A cheap sealed watch is the opposite. When the circuit fails, there's nothing a repairman can do. Wind it each morning, and you will never buy a battery, and you will never buy another watch. Buy one simple mechanical watch, even an old one, and learn to wind it. Number 4, leather work boots. A good pair of boots tells you everything about how we used to build. There's an old way of building a boot called a Goodyear welt. The sole is stitched on, not glued, and that one detail changes everything. Because when the sole finally wears thin, a cobbler simply cuts it off and stitches on a brand new one. The boot itself, the part shaped over years to your own foot, can last for decades and decades. A boot like that stops being a product and becomes a part of you. It carries the shape of your stride and the memory of every mile you have ever put on it. Men bought one good pair in their 20s and still wore them in their 50s, resoled again and again, the leather only growing richer and more personal with every passing year. Almost every modern shoe, by contrast, is simply glued together. When the sole splits away from the upper, and it always does, there is nothing to stitch and nothing to save. Into the trash it goes, and you buy another pair every single year. A welted boot costs more on the day you buy it, but resoled over 20 years, it's the cheapest footwear you'll ever own. Here's the trick the whole modern world is praying you never figure out. Cheap is not cheap. Buy the $40 thing 4 times, and you've spent more than the man who bought the good one once. Quality was never the expensive choice. It was always the thrifty one. Number 5, the old appliances. Some of these machines are older than the people watching this. Ask anyone over 60, and they'll tell you about a refrigerator, or a stove, or a chest freezer that simply ran for 40 years without a single repair. They talk about them the way you'd talk about an old friend. They were built simple and overbuilt on purpose. A heavy, slow motor, thick steel, mechanical dials you could feel click into place. There was very little to go wrong, and almost anything that did could be fixed by a local repairman with a screwdriver and a common part. There used to be a repairman in every town who knew these machines inside and out. He kept them running for 30 years, and the whole street knew his name. Today's appliances are run by circuit boards, sensors, and software. They do impressive things for a while, and then just after the warranty ends, one cheap little board quietly fails. And the repairman, if you can even find one now, shakes his head and tells you what they all tell you these days. It is cheaper to just replace the whole thing. And that one small board costs nearly as much as a whole new machine. It's the light bulb cartel all over again, dressed in stainless steel, built not to serve you but to bring you back to the store. If you only remember one thing today, let it be this. I put together a free list. The brands and makers that still build things the honest old way, the exact ones I'd buy for my own home. It's right there in the description, and it costs you nothing. Grab it before you waste another $1 on something built to break. Number 6, the old glass. You have probably got a piece of this in a cupboard right now. The clear glass bowls and measuring cups your grandmother used weren't ordinary glass. They were made of something called borosilicate, the same tough glass developed for laboratory beakers. It could go from the icebox into a hot oven without so much as a crack. It shrugged off heat, cold, and decades of hard daily use. A single set of bowls could serve a family through 3 full generations of Sunday dinners without a single chip. It was harder to make and it cost more, and that in the end is exactly why it was quietly replaced. Strength was the first thing on the chopping block, but borosilicate costs more. So a lot of cheaper glassware was quietly switched to a weaker recipe that can shatter from a change in temperature. The good old pieces are still out there in thrift shops for $1 or $2. Number 7. Hand tools. There is nothing fancy here, and that is exactly the point. A good hand tool is the purest example on this list. Drop-forged steel and a handle of solid hardwood. There's nothing in them to expire. With a little care and the occasional sharpening, they work exactly the same on the day you die as the day they were forged. No battery, no coating, no chip inside to ever expire. The old makers stamped their own name right into the steel, partly out of pride, and partly because they fully expected that name to still be doing honest work 100 years later. My grandfather's tools are on this bench right now. I've never once thought about replacing them. The bargain bin tool is soft pot metal that bends, rounds off a bolt, and snaps when you need it most, which is why the smartest shelf in any hardware store is the used tool bin. People think I can tell good from junk because I'm some kind of expert. I'm not. I just pick it up. Honest weight, a maker's name, something I can take apart and fix, then it'll last. You can learn that in a single afternoon. Number 8. The old telephone. They really do not make them like this anymore. The old rotary telephone was nearly a weapon, a solid, dense block with a handset you could have hammered nails with. And here's the strange reason it was so good. For decades, you didn't actually own your telephone. You rented it from the phone company, which meant the company that built it was on the hook to keep it working for years and years, completely for free. So they built it to never ever break. And it worked. Families used the very same telephone for 30, even 40 years. It survived children, house moves, and a whole lifetime of receivers slammed down in anger. Now think of the phone in your pocket. Sealed glass, a battery that fades in 2 years, a screen that cracks if you look at it wrong. Number 9. The manual typewriter. Every one of these was built to take a beating. A manual typewriter is hundreds of small steel parts working in perfect time, and not one of them needs electricity. You could drop it down a flight of stairs, and it's the stairs you'd worry about. Writers used the very same machine for their entire careers. They were built like the iron bridges of their day. Heavy, honest, and meant to stand for a century without a word of complaint. A good one from the 1930s, cleaned and oiled, still types beautifully. Press a key, and 90 years fall away. Made by people who quietly assumed it would outlive them, and it did. Number 10. The wool blanket. And we will finish with something soft, the simplest thing on the list, and maybe the one that tells the truest story. A heavy wool blanket, properly woven, lasts for generations. Wool is a quiet miracle, warm even when damp, and astonishingly tough. One good blanket warmed a grandmother on a cold farm, then warmed her daughter, and then her daughter's children. The same blanket, the same warmth, quietly passed down the years. Look close at the weave of a good one, and you can see why it lasts. It is dense, tight, and patient, spun to be used hard for a very, very long time. The thin synthetic blankets sold today pill, they tear, and they lose their warmth within just a few winters. Then they're thrown out, and another is bought, and another after that. And that small word, inherited, is exactly what we have lost. A real wool blanket was never really bought. It was inherited. 10 things: a skillet, a machine, a watch, boots, an appliance, a bowl, a tool, a phone, a typewriter, and a blanket. Look at that list again. Not one of them was high technology. Not one was complicated. They were simply made by people who expected them to last and sold to people who flatly refused to be charged for the same thing twice. That quiet agreement is what built a lasting home. That's the real difference. Not the materials, the honesty. And here's the good news. That world hasn't completely vanished. A few honest makers still build the old way. They are quieter than the big brands, and they cost a little more, and they are worth every penny. You just have to know where to look, and now you do. So before you buy your next thing, stop and ask the old question. Is this built to serve me for years, or to be sold to me again? I gathered a free list of the makers I still trust, the ones who never stopped doing it right. It's waiting in the description. Pull up a stool, hit subscribe, and I'll see you back here at the bench. That is the whole secret of this channel and of a well-built life. Take good care of your things, and they will take good care of you.